Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. I'm Jane Bernhard, and I interview business leaders and rising leaders on their career journey to hopefully inspire yours. Our guest today is Chris Melissinos. Chris Melissinos is the Principal Evangelist for Video Games and Immersive Technologies at AWS, where he helps influence the next generation of game technology and offerings from AWS, while also acting as a developer advocate, ensuring that the needs of game developers are met. Prior to AWS, he was the Chief Gaming Officer at Sun Microsystems, Inc., creator of the Smithsonian American Art Museum's The Art of Video Games exhibition, Executive Director of Media and Entertainment for Verizon, and a founding board member of the Video Game History Foundation. His The Art of Video Games exhibition explored the 40-year evolution of video games as an art form, demonstrating its impact on American culture, and traveled to 10 additional museums across the U.S. For this work, he received the Industry Ambassador Award at the 2013 Game Developers Choice Awards at the Game Developers Conference. A frequent speaker at major industry events and universities around the world, he has been featured in more than 30 news outlets, including CBS, ABC, BBC, NPR, Wired, Time Magazine, National Geographic, Nintendo Power, and Game Informer. Hi, Chris. I am very excited to have you as the guest on this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. As we just chatted about, we originally connected in 2023 when I was a student at Columbia Business School, and you very graciously gave me career advice. I was thinking about guests I wanted to have on the show. I thought back to some of the advice that you gave me, and I am just very inspired to learn about your career journey in gaming and tech. You have a very impressive journey in leadership and entertainment, and I am very excited to learn more about the stepping stones that you took along the way, the lessons that you learned, and just I want to share advice that you have to others who look at your career and also feel inspired. So thank you for being here.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Like you were saying, when we were getting ready to jump in the call, it's like, wait a minute, let me just make sure I have all my notes together and everything. And that was like, oh my goodness, yeah, we actually spoke back then. I was like, I hope I gave you good advice. So no, it's my pleasure to be on. Thank you so much for asking me. It's my privilege, truly.
Of course. Thank you. And I've seen a lot of your content too. And so it's really, I have lots of questions just on the media and public speaking work that you've done, because I find that really, really interesting. But to kind of start at the beginning, can you walk us through the different chapters of your career, and also how you knew when it was time to move from one chapter to the next?
Well, okay, yeah. How long is this podcast? We're doing this for a couple hours? No, I'll go ahead and try to make it quick. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate to have had a career focusing on an industry that I'm incredibly passionate about, right? Specifically the video games industry. So when I was a kid, I started programming on an old machine called a Commodore VIC-20. It had 5 kilobytes of RAM in it. 3,192 bytes of data, of space, right? After you booted BASIC and everything. And the reason I bring it up is because it was that first kind of encounter with computers as a kid that really just fostered this love of science, computer science, storytelling, art, right? These sorts of things, because you realized, oh my goodness, I could go ahead and type anything that I wanted to if I could learn how to talk to this computer into it, and I could get out of it a story, and it's like this immediate, instant, like gratification feedback loop, right? And I remember that just being incredibly powerful, and I realized from that very early age on that I wanted to be part of the computer industry, computer technology, and video games. So even though you kind of have to make concessions about where you are and what you're doing to put yourself in a position to have the career that you want and to build those things, I found myself kind of always gravitating towards, again, technology and using that as a way to educate myself and then apply that towards the things that I really wanted to do. So like I always say, you have to do the things you need to do so you get to do the things you want to do. And again, video games, I mean, my goodness, huge part of my entire life. I'm sitting here in my studio, and I've got, old video game magazines from, 30 years ago, just kicking around here. There's games, everywhere, right? It's part and present in my life. So I eventually worked my way into a little company called Sun Microsystems, back in 1994 as the district sales support rep. And that meant making copies for the salespeople and walking customers in and putting them in the conference room and kind of doing all these things. And I was able to, and for me, it was not that I couldn't do the job that I wanted to do, it's that I needed to prove myself. I needed to be in there. So I got my foot in the door as an assistant, and then worked my way into sales within a year of being there in the company, and continued to progress in that part of my career. And then I had this revelation one day about how we could utilize Java technologies, which is what the company was developing, to create an environment that would allow game developers to write their game once and play it across multiple devices simultaneously without having to rewrite it. And for me, all I thought was the perfect application of that technology is to create reach and engagement and exposure, right, for these new artists, right, digital artists that are creating this interactive medium. And so I did my research, and I wrote a business plan on the side, which had nothing to do with my job. And I started shopping around the company for a couple of years, and really didn't get anywhere. We were the dot in .com at that time, and we were selling more. I mean, at that point, I think it was like 90% of the world's internet infrastructure was going through a Sun Microsystems computer. So like, this is really good, but we're not doing that. We're not doing video games. Go sell more web servers. And finally, I had the right people around me, the right management, the right advocates that said, look, just go out to California, go schedule some training, but just start knocking on doors. And so I did that. And then eventually I just said, look, I've got nothing to lose, really. I'm just going to go straight to the CEO of the company. And I went, I sent my information over to Scott McNeely, who was the CEO of the company at the time. Didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks, called his office and said, look, I'm coming out there for another corporate visit, and all I need is 10 minutes with him. And if it's walking him to the toilet and back to the office, I'll take those 10 minutes. I literally said that. And his admin, Karen, who it was just awesome, laughed and said, all right, let's see if we can do better. And to Scott's credit, he called me at my desk that evening, which, I mean, that for those in that era, that's the equivalent of like Bill Gates picking the phone and calling, an employee at Microsoft. And I was on the phone with the customer at the time, and I actually said, I have to go, and just hung up. Like, I was so taken aback by the fact that he called me. And he said, great work. I forwarded your materials to my corporate leadership team, which I was like, oh, okay. Now, seriously, I'm going to lose my job. And he said, great work, but we're going in this direction. And it was that moment I said, I've done the work. I've grown up in this space, and I feel like I know what I'm talking about, and I don't agree with it. So I said to him, I think we're making a mistake. I don't think that's the right path. And he just said, why? And so I spent 25 minutes talking to him about why I thought putting chips into game consoles, which were already locked up at the time, was not the right path for us. And a month later, they called and said, okay, you come to corporate, you're going to be our games guy. And so I had the chance to then build on top of that experience and lean into building a community, and lean in and finding advocates and finding the right team members and building Java technologies that then led to the communities that built up, that led to the creation of things like Minecraft, right? And so I exited the company after 16 years as the chief gaming officer and the chief evangelist for the company, after starting as the district sales support rep, right? So for me, it was kind of the long game. I knew where I wanted to be, and I had to put myself in a situation to realize that, right? So, when I talk about the journey that I'm on, it's a journey that I've been on since I was a kid, which is I love video games for what they are. I love them for the art that they are. I love them for the empowerment that they give to people. I love that it breaks down complex technologies and engagement in a palatable and consumable way that can then ignite the imagination of others. And if I can do things to help create more art, more moments of meaningful connection, more smiles for people, that's what I want to do. And that's kind of been the continuum of the majority of my career.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's amazing. And I'm sure there will be people listening to this being like, okay, I should push myself to do something uncomfortable. I love hearing that. What do you think gave you the bravery to kind of do something that out of the box from the position that you were in? And based off of that story, what advice do you have for someone listening to this who hears that and is like, okay, I'm really motivated. I've been really scared. I haven't been pushing myself to do things that feel out of my comfort zone, but I need to. What would you say to that person?
Sure. So let's so all right. So let's start with, why did I feel comfortable enough to do this? There were a few reasons, a few things that made me comfortable enough to do this. One, I was already established in my early career. I had hit my sales numbers and all those sorts of things. Not always, but most of the time, And so I knew that if this thing kind of failed, I have that to kind of fall back on. That was number one. Number two, my management understood that there was more that I wanted to give the company than the position that I had was currently allowing me. And so they said, okay, just be careful, but yes, we'll give you the air cover to go ahead and chase this thing, because the data that you've provided, the business opportunities you've provided, demonstrate that there's a real business here that we're ignoring. So go ahead and make that happen. So it's finding those advocates, right? And the third one, honestly, is having a very supportive partner. At the time that all of this was happening, my wife and I had just bought a house and our first child was born. And I went home and I said, look, I'm going to do something tomorrow that, may cost me my job. I don't know, because if this thing goes forward, like all these executives have been telling me no, and now I'm going right to the CEO of the company. So you have to be careful about how you do that. And she's like, well, do you think you're marketable? I'm like, I don't know. We'll see what happens after all this. But the thing that made me supremely confident in doing this is because I knew my work, I knew my data, and I was comfortable enough to be able to stand in front of anybody and be challenged on the data and be able to answer the questions. So it's not enough just to have the good idea. It's not enough just to say, I want to build this, kind of groundbreaking thing. You have to do the work, right? You have to be able to demonstrate to people, not only do you know what you're talking about and why it's going to position the company or a group, right, to succeed, but you have to be able to translate those into metrics that they understand and that they succeed with. So it's not enough to say, let's go carve out this space and go after it. You have to be able to say, let's go carve out this space and go after it. And here's how it's going to positively impact you. Here are all the things that it's going to do for you. So in my case, it wasn't just, let's use Java to make games. It was, we see, at the time, competitors like Microsoft, for example, right, at the time, building a set-top box. They had Windows CE on the Sega Dreamcast. Java was also kind of aimed at the set-top box. I'm like, well, Windows CE, the biggest competitor to Java at that time, or a growing competitor, I should say, was already in a game console, already connected to television. So how do you go ahead and compete in that space? You have to be able to, meet that type of entertainment and engagement in kind. All of these devices that are going to be utilized in Java, which is basically mobile phones, they're going to need what on the back end? Servers. We are the largest server provider for the web, right, in the world. It's going to impact that business. So you had to be able to then peel that back, because what I found in my career is if the idea is too big and only you understand it, then you're not going to be able to get the right people, the right buy-in, the right accelerants to make those things happen, right? There's a wonderful book. It's one of my favorite business books ever, and it's called The Revolutionaries at Sony. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but you can probably find, a used copy and things like that. And in it, it's the story of Ken Kutaragi and how he built the PlayStation brand at Sony and built, the product. And at the end of the book, he has these seven skills for entrepreneurship. And the one that always resonates with me is unpack your innovation. Meaning that you can't just take the big idea and throw it out on the table. What you have to do is break it down into consumable parts that people can understand, that you can then build on. And by doing so, you not only get people to come along on the journey with you, because nobody builds anything great by themselves, but they also give them the permission to challenge you in each of those little pieces to make sure your data is right, to make sure you don't have a bias that is in there, right? So you have to be open to be critiqued. You have to be open for that feedback. And if you can do those things, and you have the right idea, you can find the right team, you could go build amazing things in the world. So, that's what gave me the courage to do it. I knew the work. I had the right advocates around me. I had a partner that understood how important this was and passionate for me, and that worked out. The advice that I give, make sure you do the work, make sure your data is good, make sure your story is good, right? And break it down into pieces that allow you to get the people you need onto your side so you can go build great things.
I think that's great advice. I've so many questions. So one question I have, when you transitioned into more of a leadership role after that experience and putting yourself out there very boldly, what was that learning curve like for you once you're in a new position and then you start moving up in like the corporate landscape? I'm sure at maybe a different pace, you have more responsibility. What was the learning curve like, and how did you embrace that new challenge?
So the learning curve is one that I'm still on every day. I learn from my colleagues. I learn from senior leadership. I learn from people that are new to the business too, right? Because for me, it's always about checking my gut and making sure that what I believe is actually true, right? But at the time that I came over to do this, remember, okay, so now what you've done is I've put myself in a position where I was, assertive about this. I really believed in it, and now I had the permission to go make something happen. Now you have to get all these other people in. So even taking that leadership position didn't mean that all of a sudden I got to go, all right, job well done. Everybody go off and do your stuff. No. Like the first GDC that we went to, the Game Developers Conference, me and the one engineer that I had working with me, a guy named Jeff Kesselman, we put together all the demos. We called all the companies. We wrote all the copy. We begged and borrowed from a bunch of different groups around the company without telling them that we were borrowing money from each of them so we could get the money for the booth. Like one of the things I'm most proud of, right? As silly as it sounds, is we were told you have $20 for booth shirts, right? Sun booth shirts. And I'm like, okay. So I went to 3 different groups. I got 20 from each of them for all the shirts we need. And I took the $60 in the aggregate for each, and I had custom bowling shirts made with big like flames on the sleeves. This is the early 2000s, right? Just imagine Limp Bizkit playing in the background, with the big Sun logo and these giant logos on the back. And it was something that stood out from the traditional brand of the company. Now, of course, marketing came back to me and went, those aren't on brand. But then the CEO said, when do I get one of those shirts? Now, all of a sudden, I had the ability to kind of just go do those types of things, right? So you have to know kind of where to push those edges. We would sit there with the team, build the booth, take it down. We'd work on the show floor the entire time. So for me, even leading those types of initiatives didn't mean that I could just sit back and have other people do it. I was in it every day, from standing up the server that ran javagaming.org, which became the largest forum in the world for Java game development, to having parts delivered to my house and assembling the systems that we were going to use on the show floor, because I realized if I could just take the money and not rent them and go buy the parts, when the show wrapped, I'd have 8 new development systems that I could give to team members so we could continue developing. By hook or by crook, you go ahead and get it done, right? But it's also going ahead and surprising people in ways that are really impactful. So I'll give you one quick example about this. They said, okay, now that you're in this position and GDC just happened, we want you to present to the entire global sales organization. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this, right? And so I was like, okay, I need to do something amazing because nobody's ever going to listen to me. And they put me on in a 5-day internal worldwide meeting. They put me on Wednesday at 1:00 after an API stack discussion and this big Italian lunch, pastas and stuff. And I'm like, okay, everyone's going to be falling asleep. So I got out there in this awesome suit, this 5-button matrix styled suit. It was really, again, it's a product of its time. And there are photos on the web, right? And so I came out on stage and I started talking about why video games are important and why the industry is important and where it's moving. And I showed numbers, 2 slides, maybe 3. And I said, rather than talk about the numbers, let me show you why it's exciting. And I walked off stage and a video played, all done to a song by this acid kind of punk band out of New England called Power Man 5000. It was a song called When Worlds Collide. The frontman for the band is Rob Zombie's brother from White Zombie, right? And it's this just crazy song, all choreographed or synchronized to Dreamcast footage. And like the end of it's like, the web and Java is going to make this real. And like the whole place exploding. And I walked back out on stage, standing ovation in the room. What was supposed to have been 30 minutes turned into almost a 90-minute presentation because they kept asking questions. And so what it was about, again, was helping people to better understand why it was so exciting. The numbers are one thing. That's the data. And that's the what. But the why is not just equally important. It is more important because if you can't tell a story with data, then it's just data. They felt it, right? They saw it. They heard it. And that was a thing that kind of just, I think, became a real tipping point for my influence in the company to get more people to lean into games, to take it more seriously, and to go on to power these big things, right? So it's, it's finding your way forward through that, knowing how to push to the limit, but not overstep it. It's not it's not about running through people. It's about bringing people together that want to be part of it, and then letting others that don't go off, do their own thing, support them as you can, but not let them kind of get in your way, right? So it's this constant weaving, constant, education as you go through life. And it served me well throughout my career, right, to take that approach.
I very much appreciate your emphasis on impact and storytelling in addition to the data and everything. I appreciate it. And, when I was preparing for the interview, one of the things that I wanted to ask you that I'm still going to ask you, but I feel like I'm starting to understand just from hearing you talk is what motivates you to do all of the media work that you've done, to speak as much as you do about the industry. What's clear is your passion for the industry. And also, I find that the most confident public speakers are extremely well researched and so knowledgeable in what they're talking about that they just feel so comfortable talking about it because they can back it up. And that's something that you've talked to a lot. I just remember when I was in business school, because it's been a while since I've talked to you, but I was an actor before business school. And like the first time I had to do public speaking besides acting was doing some type of debate in microeconomics. And I had no idea what I was talking about. And I didn't understand how I was supposed to I had been in business school for like 3 weeks and I was doing this debate that I wasn't prepared for. And so my entryway into public speaking, non-acting, was that. And it took me a really long time to figure out my own creative artist's way of figuring out how to share my own story and ask other people their own stories. But I learned from that. I don't like talking about things I'm not extremely confident in. I really don't like to do it. It was a school project, so I had to do it. But anyways, I'm going to ask you the question, like, what motivates you to do more of the public facing work? Even though much of this conversation has inspired that already.
Well, because video games, I truly believe, are one of the most important forms of art that we've ever had at our disposal, right? It is the most approachable form of art. It's the language that the youngest rising tide of society, right, gravitates towards, right, en masse. We consider the fact that within the next 10 years, right, 15 years, you will have a global society where virtually everybody that is alive grew up with video games at some point, right? And we're talking about even in developing countries where that's rising up, right? We're just seeing mass adoption of these things. So it's present in part of the zeitgeist. It's part of culture. But it allows these incredible stories and engagement spaces to emerge that impact billions of people. It's not just about the technology. It is about what we do with the technology that's important. And that's why I'm so passionate about speaking about video games, because I always take the approach that if the work I'm doing isn't making it better and easier for my friends who create art that ultimately is what they use to feed their family with, And it's not making it better for people who choose to take the limited amount of time that we have to engage in that art, to find reprieve in a weary world, to just forget about things for a little bit and smile, connect with, I always say, play the games that you like with the people that you love. Then I'm not doing my part. I'm not doing my job. My biggest passion is I want people to see video games the way I see them, right? As not a trivial pastime, but a reflection of society, a reflection of artists, a reflection of ourselves as we engage in them. And that truly is why I love doing what I'm doing, and why I love speaking on not just behalf of the industry, but for anybody that would want to hear, right? Because it's had such a fundamental, monumental impact on me from the time I was a child throughout my entire life. And so that's what motivates me every day. Plus, I love to hear the stories of what people are building and how did you think of this and how did you come up with these systems and, what made you, decide to go down this path, or what didn't work. Let's learn from what didn't work, right? So those are my big motivators, right? I just believe video games are extraordinary, and I want more people to see them the way I do.
What's interesting to me is that it seems like your level of curiosity has always been really high in the space, but in general, like I appreciate one of the things you said earlier in this conversation was that you referenced something about this being a journey that you're still on and that you're still learning and still growing. And it's really interesting to hear that. Because I think sometimes when you're early in your career, you're like, okay, well, in 20 years, I'll just be doing the exact same thing. And like, but that's not how careers usually work. So I'm curious to learn how, as you moved along in the different chapters of your career, how it changed in terms of like how you spent your time and what you focused on learning.
So what did I focus? Well, it would depend on it. It would depend on the roles that I've had. Okay, so I took a brief hiatus from games in the middle of my career to go. I was be the vice president of marketing, communications, and PR, crisis communications, and web development for a public company. Now, the reality is the reason that I took that job was because at the time I was also building the art of video games for the Smithsonian, and I was writing a book at the same time. And I had left the company that I had left Sun Microsystems, and I was offered a job that would have put me in New York. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. And so I'm like, well, look, I can't have a family and have to be in New York and build the Smithsonian exhibition and write a book all at the same time. Like, it's just impossible to do. So at least if I could remove one of those factors. So I took a job doing something that I knew how to do well and built, a pretty sizable team. I think I went from 3 employees to 46 in 18 months, right? And built out all this stuff while doing, all of this other work. And so for me, it's not just about learning about the industry that I love or the technology, but it's also learning about myself. Where are my gaps? What are the things I can do better as a leader? How can I go ahead and pivot to make sure that I'm being as effective for the people that I'm leading, be effective as a husband, as a father, and that's a constant, thing that you're always on that continuum learning. A few things that I did learn is that number one, you can't ask the people that are working for you to work harder than you do, right? So it is really taking that leadership stance of, I may have to go ahead and do stuff on a weekend, and maybe I need somebody to be along with me, but I'm never going to have you do this, without me there, type of thing, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that leadership can be a difficult place to be because you're constantly being swayed, right, by influences within your organization, with your management, with what's kind of going on in the world. And so one of the things that, whenever I'd lead teams, I'd say, listen, I expect to be challenged every single day, right? Because I have my own biases. And after I've been challenged on all those things, and when you make the decision as a leader to go in this direction, everybody gets in line and we all go and do it together, because somebody has to make the decision, right? One of the things, I currently work at AWS. One of the leadership principles is disagree and commit, right? Which is, hey, I don't agree exactly here, but I'm committed to working with the team to make sure that we get to the right place, right? So it's being able to give up, some of yourself, right? To, again, constantly be challenged. But when you make the decision, the team goes forward and we do it together. The other thing that I learned is, it's not that I learned, it's just part of who I am, is I have zero tolerance for people that take the credit of other people's work. Zero. And if everybody went ahead and joined in on this and people went ahead and put the work in, they deserve to get credit for it. And I've had to counsel colleagues and even other leadership, right, in prior companies on this, right? Which is, no, you're not there to go ahead and make your boss look good. You're there to do the right job for the company. And if you have the right boss, they'll understand that I want to hire people that are better than me at these pieces, because where my skill comes in is to help bring them together, to lead them to do something great, right? But you want to hire the best people that can fill in all the gaps that you have. And believe me, there are plenty that I have, and it's knowing what those gaps are. So again, I don't even know if I'm really answering your question. Now I'm just talking in general, kind of like building team philosophy.
It's helpful. I'm enjoying listening and learning from it. No, I appreciate that. I wish more people thought about the not taking credit for other people's work, because I think that's an issue that a lot of people come up against in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a good, here's a really good one, I think, to be aware of, right? If you're in a position where somebody is constantly asking you for data all the time, but never giving you a reason why you're feeding back, it's because typically what I find is those people may have sold themselves into a position that they're not necessarily qualified for, or they feel apprehensive about. So what they want is the data, so that way they can turn around and say it, even if they don't understand the meaning of it. And you can fall into that trap very easily. I think it's always better to say, hey, I'm happy to be wrong. And I use that phrase a lot. I'm like, hey, look, I'm happy to be wrong. Or I tell people, hey, the advice is worth what you paid for it, which is zero. Like, I could be entirely wrong here, but I don't think that I am. And if it is an area that I don't know, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in it. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't make, me any better. What I want to know is, why are you doing this? How are you doing it? Change my mind, right? Help me to be a better version of me, so I can be a better version of me for you as well, right? And so, yeah, it's a bit of self-awareness. Goes a long, long way. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And in terms of self-awareness, has there been like a challenge that you feel like you've consistently faced throughout your career that you've had to work hard to overcome?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I have a very close friend of mine who was one of my bosses that encouraged me to go forward when I was at Sun. And he's like, throughout your life, what you need is, he goes, you need like one or two people that can just walk behind you and kind of pick up all of the destruction that you leave in your wake, right? Because I'm like, I've got 50 ideas that I want to do, and I can piece them all together and show how they're all going to work. It's like, oh, but these detailed pieces of it, like that's not me. And and I know that about myself, right? Now, a perfect example is, I happen to be a mostly visual person. So my presentation style is, here's a single picture on the screen. I'm going to talk to it for 5 minutes, right? Versus, here's an eye chart on the screen. Now, hopefully you can read all the stuff if I blow that stuff up. So I know that about myself. Sometimes I fly here and I need a team that understands that's where my greatest strength is, but where my weaknesses are maybe following through on some of the smaller pieces. Like, I know that I need help there. And it is something that I've struggled with my whole life, because there's so many things that I want to do and try and experiment with, that sometimes I lose sight of those pieces. So it's a constant battle for me to make sure that I go back and I'm doing kind of the detail work. And it doesn't always happen, right? And any of you that's ever waited for an email coming back from me, sometimes it's like, I read it, I promise. But unfortunately, I can't get it out of my brain pan, right, and action to go ahead and get it back to you. And so one of the things where I had worked very effectively is people will know that if I am to deliver a product, right, if I'm to deliver a work product or something for the team, when I deliver it, it will be A, quality work. You may not get it till 15 minutes before you need it, but I promise you it will be bar raising, because for me, it's not just a reflection of me, it's a reflection of the things that I care about, the ideas that I have, the industry that I represent, the colleagues that I support, right? And so it is this constant balance, constant strain for me. I swear all the time, I'm going to make lists, doesn't work. I'm going to clean up my inbox, doesn't work. It's just, I mean, every time my wife, grabs my phone, she's like, how come you have 291 unread messages right now? Right. I'm just looking at that on my phone. Right.
Oh my gosh, that would stress me out.
No, I have one, email account that has more than 10,000 just unopened messages in it. Right. Because I know that about myself. Right. But when I get around to it, you'll get a good answer. You'll get a quality product. Right. But again, it's that constant juggling of the time to do those pieces versus what I'm just so passionate, excited to learn about. Right. And for me, it's always learning, always building things, always trying things, right, to understand how they all fit together. And so, again, what I seek to do is build teams that understand that understand where I can have the greatest amount of impact, where to not expect me necessarily to lean in as hard. And so you want to find that good combination of skills that bring people together, like-minded, group, right? So you can work together towards something big. Another one of Ken Kutaragi's pieces of advice in The Revolutionaries at Sony.
I very much appreciate you sharing all of that and the self-awareness. It's so helpful to just hear what other people have had to work through on their journey. My mind is going in so many, like yours, so many different directions because I've so many questions. I'm curious. So I hear from a lot of people, and I've experienced, just to pivot the conversation a little bit, that the gaming industry is really hard to break into. And it can be really difficult to find a job in the gaming space nowadays. I'm curious if you were someone who's earlier in their career, whether they just finished college or business school or grad school, and they're trying to break into the gaming space and they're so passionate about it, or they're so passionate about tech and they're just struggling with the market. What would you say to that person?
So what I would say is, I don't think the issues that we're seeing in the games industry are specific or endemic of just the games industry. We're seeing this across the board, right? It's as more and more people are building these skills to move into tech and these sorts of things, right? The competition just becomes more fierce. I think, something that I said earlier, which is you have to do the things you need to do so you get to do the things you want to do, is a good piece of advice. So I knew a perfect example, but when I joined Sun, prior to that, I had been running the Atari and Sega forums for AOL, and I was running them on the side of my job so that way they'd put an IDS line in my house, right? And was running those things. I started programming when I was 9 years old. Right. So it's not like I didn't know how to use computers and how to build networks and do all of these things. But that wasn't where I was going to get in, because they're like, well, you have some experience, but not enough experience. It's like, great, get me in the door. And so sometimes that is what you need to do. What my suggestion is, when you want to break into these places, let's say, you're coming out of college and you're like, I want to be in this big company X or Y, right? Say, great. Are there multiple things you think you could wind up doing in that big company? There are. Fantastic. Okay, what's the fastest path to get inside? Because that's the hardest part. The hardest part is just getting through the door. Then if you have the right management, they'll go, man, this person has all these other things they can lend themselves to the company. How do we put them in the best position to do their best for the company? And that's when you move laterally. So my advice is, as you're coming out, don't just think about the job you really, really want. It's what are the stepping stones that I'm going to need to do to get there? Are there places for me to enter a company maybe a little lower than I intended and then position myself to be there? Yes, that's the way to do it, right? And so that would be my a big piece of advice when breaking in. The other thing too is I would say bigger companies aren't necessarily the only place that you're going to find that fulfillment, right? There are a ton of smaller companies that are starting up. I have 3 friends right now that are doing startups and are finding funding for them. So, just because it may feel a little difficult doesn't mean that it's always going to be difficult or that there's no opportunity for you here. Sometimes you have to adjust your expectations a little bit, right? To kind of figure out where you can get in and then how you grow to fit that space, right? There's this saying, right? Somebody who's born on third and thinks they hit a home run. No, right? You only had 1 base to run, but everybody else had 4, right? And so it's not that, well, I'm out of school, I've got this degree, and I expect to have this, and in 6 months, I want to raise, and then within a year, I'm going to be promoted. Okay, those are great ambitions to have, but they may not be entirely realistic, right? Because at the end of the day, you still have to prove yourself and what you bring to the team and how you position that. So it's having a tremendous amount of self-awareness, making sure that you are building the skills you need to get towards the thing that you want, and working your way in there. Find the right advocates, understand how to speak the language of acceptance, right? The language of adoption within the organization so people can internalize your idea. They can kind of defend you, right, when you're not in the room because they know what you want to do. They understand what you're kind of working towards, right? So yeah, those are a couple pieces of advice. I got one more for you too, which I love this one. It's from Guy Kawasaki. He used to work at Apple, right under Steve Jobs, and he's written all these books. And one of the things in his book is the 10-20-30 rule for pitching your idea, right? If you're going to a VC, for example, it's 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point font. If you cannot tell your story in 10 slides, 20 minutes with a 30-point font, then your story is too big. It doesn't make sense to anybody but you. So I use that, and then I build on top of that. And what I would always tell my teams are, if you have your executives in the room, right, or the people that you want to fund your company in the room, you got that 20 minutes and 10 slides. They're going to hear 3, and they're going to remember 1. What's the 1? What's the 1 slide that they need to walk away with, right? Is it about you, about the company, about the opportunity? Make it simple, but make it resonate, right? And I find by breaking down those ideas into those components is an incredibly difficult thing to do. There's another old saying, right? If I had more time, I would have made it shorter, right? And so kind of getting to that discipline of distilling your idea down into demonstrable, consumable pieces that demonstrate opportunity for the people that need to invest in you, in your company, in your idea. It's the fastest way to go ahead and get acceptance and start building the stuff you want to do. But it can't be, look how smart I am. I just got this big degree and I know I could do this. And I love video games. And so therefore you should hire me. Okay. Like what else? Type of thing, right? So
I very much appreciate the advice, both about getting your foot in the door of a company first and about the 10-20-30 rule that you just shared. That gives me a lot to think about, because that definitely it is challenging to do that. I'm just imagining like some recent things that I worked on, and I am going to try that.
Yeah. Look, I'll share one other quick story with you. I remember having a conversation with some colleagues once, and this gentleman was like, I don't understand why this executive doesn't understand this. Like, how come he's smart? How come he doesn't understand it? And the senior leader in the group said, it's not his job to understand it. It's your job to explain it in a way that he can. You've not done your job. They can't necessarily buy into your vision. Your vision is only good for you if that's the case. How do you make it palatable, consumable for the people that you need to back you? It's not his problem. It's your problem. And that was kind of like a lightning bolt moment for him of, I never thought about it that way. Because it's always like, why can't you see how brilliant I am? Well, because maybe you're blinded by your own brilliance, right? And maybe we can learn from each other. Maybe you're not considering the other things that executive, that financier, something like that have on their plate as well. It's not always about you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about people's different roles, and even going back to what you were saying about having like the bird's eye view and not doing like the tiniest of details, and knowing your strengths and what your role is. This has been such a great conversation. I've learned so much. I really appreciate the personal stories. It's so memorable and encouraging and interesting. And I have one final question for you.
Sure.
I like to ask everyone this question. I think that success means something different to everybody. Everybody has a different definition of what that means to them. And as young people are kind of coming up in the workplace, I think it could be helpful to hear how different people think about shaping their career, shaping their life, what they think success is. So my final question is, in 2025, what does success mean to you?
Success to me means the same thing that it has always meant to me, right? Which is, when I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror, do I like the person that I see, right? And to not be so trite about that, it's nobody's going to remember the car you drove, right? When you leave this earth, right? But what they will remember, hopefully, is the kind of person you were, whether or not you were able to help them. Did you leave the world a better place than when you got here? Did you help to change things to be better? And that is something that I have tried to, emulate and present throughout my whole life, because that is the way that I feel. When we were building the art of video games at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, right? This was the first art exhibition that the museum had done. And what I love about it is that it broke like every expectation that they had. I mean, almost 700,000 people went through the exhibition in 6 months before it started traveling for 3.5 years to 10 of the museums around the country, breaking attendance records everywhere, right? Opening night of the exhibition in Washington, D.C. at the Art Museum, they have the most beautiful courtyard. I mean, I believe it's one of like the largest like rental spaces in D.C. It's got this glass covered, roof that's just absolutely stunning. And there's politicians there, and there's like my heroes in the games industry. Hideo Kojima was there, and Ken Levine, and Nolan Bushnell, and Kelly Santiago, and Robin Hood, like all of these incredible people. And I had to get up and, give opening remarks. And there was my wife and my 3 kids, standing right there at the very front. And right behind me, they were playing Geometry Wars, like on a 120-foot, like laser projector behind me. It was crazy. And it's one of those moments where you stand there and you say, when will I ever be in the position to, make an impactful statement like this again? And what I said was, to my family, that without their gift of time and patience, I would not have been able to create something that I felt was important for the kids like me that grew up finding a place within this art form and knowing how moving and impactful it is for billions of people out there. And I remember telling my kids, if you care enough about something in the world and you find people with as much passion as you can do great things, right? And that is what success is to me, are the things I'm doing impacting the people that meet them in a positive way? Is it making the world a better place in some small way? And that's how I, judge success for me. Are we making life better for people? Are we making life better for people who make this art, who people that play it? And all the things that I learn along the way, does it make me, like I said, a better husband and a better father and a better friend? And I hope it has. So that's what success is for me. Can I get more people to smile more frequently? Then I did my job.
I think that is a beautiful response and a great way to end this conversation. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing so much of the human side of everything that you have gone through in your journey. I very much appreciate it. I learned a lot. I'm sure other people will as well. And I am extremely grateful for the time and opportunity to learn more about you and to learn about your story.
Oh, thank you, Jane. This is an absolute pleasure for me. I know we didn't talk as much about video games and amazing the industry is, but maybe we'll have to do a follow-up and unpack that. But no, again, this has been a real privilege for me. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. If something about this conversation inspired you, I'd love to know. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn at Jane Bernhard if there's a guest you'd want to hear from, or if there's a type of background you'd like to learn from, and I'll do my best to make it happen. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to my Substack and follow the series here. And perhaps share it with a friend who may need some words of encouragement. See you next time.